Most people doing intermittent fasting are doing it correctly and still not losing weight. A 2021 study published in the New England Journal of Medicine followed 139 adults doing 16/8 intermittent fasting for 12 months. At the end of the year, the fasting group had lost no significantly more weight than the group eating normally. No significantly more. After 12 months of discipline, skipped breakfasts, and ignored hunger. And here's the thing. That study is not proof that fasting doesn't work. It is proof that fasting alone is not enough. There are specific, fixable reasons why the scale stops moving. Today I am breaking down the exact ones, and more importantly, the exact fixes. The number most people start with when they begin intermittent fasting is 16. 16 hours fasted, 8 hours eating. That is the most widely practiced protocol, the most researched window, and the first thing almost every article recommends. It is also the window where most people plateau within 6 to 8 weeks and then quietly conclude that fasting simply does not work for their body. But here is what that number leaves out entirely. 16 hours gets you into a fasted state. It does not guarantee fat burning. It does not guarantee a caloric deficit. And it tells you absolutely nothing about what is happening during your 8-hour eating window, which is where most of the real problems live. The 16-hour window is the entrance. What you do once you are inside determines everything. The first reason people stop losing weight on intermittent fasting is the one nobody wants to hear, and the one almost every fasting guide skips entirely. The eating window has expanded without the person noticing. This happens gradually and invisibly. Week 1. The window is genuinely 8 hours, noon to 8 p.m., clean boundaries, consistent. By week 6, breakfast has crept to 11, the last snack is landing at 9:30, and the actual eating window is now closer to 10.5 hours. The person still believes they are doing 16,008. They are not. They are doing something closer to 13.5, which is barely different from normal eating patterns for most adults. A 2020 study in Cell Metabolism found that the average American's natural eating window, without any protocol at all, is already around 14 to 15 hours. If your fasting window has drifted back to 13 or 14 hours, you have not shortened your eating window. You have just renamed your existing habits. The fix here is precise and requires no willpower. Pick a hard stop time and a hard start time. Write them down. Set an alarm for 30 minutes before the eating window closes as a signal to finish. Do not estimate your window. Measure it. Estimation is how the window expands. The window you think you are keeping and the window you are actually keeping are often not the same thing, and that gap is frequently the entire explanation for why the scale has not moved in weeks. A useful tool here is a simple notes app on your phone. Log the first bite time and the last bite time every single day for 1 week. Most people are genuinely surprised by what 7 days of honest data reveals about their actual eating window versus the one they believed they were maintaining. The second reason is more surprising, and it is the one that catches the most disciplined fasters off guard. What you eat during the eating window is overriding the hormonal benefits of the fast. Intermittent fasting works through 2 primary mechanisms: caloric reduction through a compressed eating window, and hormonal changes driven by the fasted state, specifically reduced insulin and increased fat oxidation. But if the eating window is filled with highly processed foods, refined carbohydrates, and frequent snacking across the full 8 hours, insulin levels spike repeatedly throughout the window. The hormonal benefit of the fast is partially erased by the eating pattern that follows it. Think of someone like James, 34, been doing 16/8 for 3 months, genuinely committed. His eating window runs noon to 8, but lunches a sandwich from the corner shop, he snacks at 3, has a protein bar at 5, and then eats dinner at 7:30. His insulin is elevated for virtually his entire eating window. The fasted state produced clean metabolic conditions for 16 hours. The eating window undid much of that work in the first 30 minutes. The fast was real. The benefit was compromised. James is frustrated because he is doing exactly what every article told him to do. The article did not tell him what to do inside the window. That omission is costing him the result. The fix is not eliminating food groups or going low carb. It is restructuring the eating window to have fewer, more complete meals with longer gaps between them. 2 meals instead of 2 meals and 3 snacks. Eating to genuine satiety at each sitting rather than grazing lightly across the full 8 hours. The goal is to keep insulin low for as much of the day as possible, and that means keeping it low not just during the fast, but during the compressed eating window itself. It also means being deliberate about what the first meal of the day looks like. Breaking a 16-hour fast with a high-sugar, high-carbohydrate meal produces a sharp insulin spike that sets the hormonal tone for the rest of the eating window. Breaking the fast with a protein-forward meal, eggs, meat, fish, legumes, produces a much flatter insulin response and creates genuine satiety that reduces the urge to snack 2 hours later. The composition of the first meal is one of the most underused levers available to anyone doing time-restricted eating, and it costs nothing to adjust. Now here is where it gets genuinely interesting, because the next reason people plateau on intermittent fasting has nothing to do with food at all. The third reason is sleep, and specifically the quality and timing of sleep relative to the fasting window. A 2019 study published in the journal Obesity found that poor sleep quality increases ghrelin, the hunger hormone, by up to 24% the following day. It also reduces leptin, the satiety hormone, by a similar margin. What this means practically is that a bad night of sleep produces the hormonal profile of someone who has not eaten in 24 hours, even if they ate normally the night before. For someone doing intermittent fasting, consistently poor sleep means they are entering every eating window already hormonally primed to overconsume. The fasted 16 hours did their job. The poor sleep undid it before the window even opened. This is not a discipline problem. It is a physiology problem, and it is one of the most underdiagnosed reasons people plateau on fasting protocols that were working in the early weeks. The fix is not complicated, but it requires treating sleep as part of the fasting protocol rather than a separate variable. The last meal should finish at least 3 hours before sleep. This reduces the cortisol and digestive activity that fragments sleep architecture. A consistent sleep and wake time, even on weekends, stabilizes ghrelin and leptin cycles so that the eating window opens from a position of genuine hunger rather than hormonally amplified craving. Sleep is not optional recovery from the day. It is active metabolic work. When sleep quality degrades, fasting performance degrades alongside it, reliably, measurably, and often invisibly. The fourth reason is one that the fasting community has been slow to acknowledge because it challenges a core assumption of the protocol. Stress, and specifically elevated cortisol, can stop weight loss on intermittent fasting even when everything else is being done correctly. Cortisol is a glucocorticoid hormone. When it is chronically elevated, through work pressure, relationship strain, financial stress, or even excessive training volume, it raises blood glucose. Raised blood glucose produces an insulin response. That insulin response signals fat storage. This happens regardless of whether the person is in a fasted state, because cortisol acts upstream of insulin. A person under significant chronic stress can be maintaining a clean 16-hour fast, eating whole foods in a structured window, sleeping adequately, and still not lose weight, because their baseline cortisol level is keeping insulin elevated throughout the day. A 2018 review in Frontiers in Neuroendocrinology documented this mechanism specifically and noted that cortisol-driven weight loss resistance is more prevalent in people who are already in a caloric deficit, because the physiological stress of restriction itself can compound the cortisol load. Most people trying to lose weight are already in some degree of caloric restriction, which means they are already carrying a stress load that the fasting is adding to, not reducing. This is the part of the conversation that requires the most honesty. If your life is currently operating at a high baseline stress level, and for most people it is, adding a restrictive eating protocol without addressing the cortisol environment is like trying to drain a bathtub while the tap is still fully open. The fasting is working. The stress is refilling what the fasting removes. The fix is not abandoning the protocol. It is taking the stress variable as seriously as the eating window variable, deliberate recovery, adequate sleep, and where necessary, temporarily reducing the intensity of the fasting window to lower the total physiological stress load. There is also a category of hidden inputs that almost nobody audits once the fasting routine feels established. Drinks. Specifically, the drinks that feel like they should be fasting compatible but are quietly producing an insulin response during the fasted window. A splash of oat milk in the morning coffee, a flavored electrolyte drink that contains maltodextrin, a protein shake taken before noon because the person read that it is technically fasting safe for weight loss goals. Each of these is individually small. Collectively, across a fasted window that is 16 hours long, they can produce enough of an insulin signal to meaningfully blunt fat oxidation for 2 to 4 hours at a time. The person is fasting by schedule. They are not fasting by physiology. And the difference between those two things, sustained over weeks, is measurable on the scale. This is not about obsessive purity. It is about understanding what the fasted state actually requires to produce the outcomes you are looking for. For weight loss specifically, the primary mechanism is reduced insulin across an extended window. Anything that triggers insulin, regardless of its calorie content, narrows that window without the person realizing it. Plain water, black coffee, plain tea, and unflavored electrolytes with no sweeteners are genuinely fasting compatible. Everything else deserves a closer, more honest look than most people give it once the habit has settled in. Stop here for a moment, because what we have covered so far, the drifting eating window, the snacking pattern inside the window, the hidden drinks, the sleep quality deficit, the cortisol load, those are the 5 most common reasons the scale stops moving. But the 6th reason is the one that explains why people who have genuinely addressed all of the above still find progress slower than expected. And it is the reason that most fasting content never mentions at all. The 6th reason is metabolic adaptation. When the body is exposed to the same eating pattern for long enough, the same window, the same rough caloric intake, the same meal composition, it adapts. Basal metabolic rate adjusts downward. Fat oxidation efficiency plateaus. The hormonal response to the fasted state becomes less pronounced because the body has stopped treating it as a novel stimulus and started treating it as the new baseline. A 2020 paper in Cell Reports found that metabolic adaptation to intermittent fasting begins in measurable ways after approximately 12 weeks of consistent practice. For most people, 12 weeks is precisely when the initial results slow and the frustration begins. What feels like a failing protocol is often a successful one that the body has simply learned to accommodate. The fasting is no longer disrupting the system, it has become the system. The fix here is variation, not abandonment and not despair. The body responds to novelty. Cycling between different fasting lengths, a 14-hour window on some days, an 18-hour window on others, an occasional 24-hour fast once every few weeks, prevents the metabolic habituation that makes a fixed protocol progressively less effective over time. This is not about escalating restriction. It is about maintaining the biological signal that produces results rather than allowing the body to neutralize it through adaptation. Now here is the part that most people in this situation have never considered, because every reason above is physiological. But there is a psychological dimension to the plateau that runs parallel to the biology and is almost never discussed. When intermittent fasting begins producing visible results, the emotional relationship with the protocol shifts in a way that is subtle and nearly impossible to see from the inside. In the beginning, fasting feels like deliberate discipline, a choice made against real resistance, repeated every day with visible payoff to reinforce the effort. That feedback loop is powerful. It builds momentum. It builds identity. And once the protocol becomes identity rather than tool, something quietly changes. The scrutiny applied in the early weeks, the honest measurement of the window, the awareness of what went into the eating hours, the attention to sleep quality, begins to relax. Not because the person stopped caring, but because caring and executing have merged into a comfortable routine, and comfortable routines do not get audited the way new behaviors do. People begin unconsciously protecting the protocol from the data. They explain away the plateau rather than examine the variables. They attribute the stall to their age, their metabolism, their hormones, anything except the eating window that is quietly expanded by 90 minutes or the evening snack that has silently re-entered the routine. This is one of the most consistent reasons people spend months on a fasting protocol that stopped working weeks ago without making the small adjustments that would restart progress. The protocol is not failing them. They have stopped watching it closely enough to notice where it has slipped. The global picture on this is striking. Research conducted across time-restricted eating populations in Japan, Sweden, and the United Kingdom consistently shows that participants with the best long-term outcomes share one variable that has nothing to do with window length or meal composition. They treat the protocol as a flexible tool rather than a fixed identity. They adjust when the data tells them to adjust. They do not experience a modified window as a personal failure. They experience it as a calibration. The 2022 TREAT trial, published in the New England Journal of Medicine, found that the most successful long-term participants in time-restricted eating protocols were those who made the most deliberate adjustments over time, not those who maintained the strictest unbroken consistency. The people who never deviated had outcomes comparable to the control group. The people who paid attention and adapted had measurably better results across every tracked metric. This should feel like a genuine relief. The plateau is not a verdict on your body. It is not proof that fasting does not work for you. It is information about your current approach. And information is something you can act on. The people who succeed long-term with intermittent fasting are not the ones with the most willpower or the strictest protocols. They are the ones who stay curious about their own data rather than defensive about their own habits. Here is why the plateau still feels like failure, even when the data says otherwise. Human beings assess their situation relative to a shifting reference point, not in absolute terms. If you lost 8 pounds in the first 6 weeks and nothing in the last 6, your brain does not register the 8 pounds kept. It registers 6 weeks of effort that produced no new visible result. The reference point migrates to the plateau, not the progress. This is not irrationality. It is how the mind tracks resources and detects threats. But it means the emotional experience of a plateau is almost always more severe than the physiological reality warrants. You are not back where you started. You have not lost what you gained. You are at a place where the approach needs one specific adjustment, not abandonment, not an overhaul, just one honest look at which variable has slipped. Here is what all of this comes down to. You are most likely not losing weight on intermittent fasting because of one or more of 6 specific fixable things. The eating window has drifted wider than you realize. The eating pattern inside the window is keeping insulin elevated across the full 8 hours. Hidden drinks during the fasted window are producing insulin responses you are not accounting for. Sleep is producing a hormonal environment that counteracts the work of the fast. Chronic stress is running cortisol high enough to block fat oxidation independent of what you eat. Or the protocol has been consistent long enough that the body has fully adapted and stopped responding. None of these are permanent conditions. None require starting over. Each one has a specific adjustment that takes less than a week to implement and less than 2 weeks to produce a measurable change. The one concrete thing worth doing today is this. Look at the last 7 days of your eating window. Not the window you believe you kept, but the actual first bite and last bite of each day. Write them down. Calculate the real average. If the average fasting period is below 15 hours, that is your first variable and your first fix. Close that gap before changing anything else. One adjustment, implemented with genuine consistency, will tell you within 2 weeks whether that was the primary issue. If it was not, you move to the next variable. Systematic troubleshooting, applied one specific variable at a time and measured honestly, will always outperform a wholesale overhaul of a protocol that was partly working and never properly examined. And here is the question this cannot fully answer for you. If the version of intermittent fasting you have been doing has stopped producing results, is the problem that fasting does not work for you? Or is it that the specific approach you took to fasting has simply reached the limit of what it can do without being deliberately and honestly adjusted?